Welcome back to another session of Python and PANOS API 101. Today we'll do some interesting things, including going to the supermarket and doing some groceries. So let's get started. So I just opened the script we made in the last session, in which we got all the policies from the firewall. Today we will continue with that. But to be able to get the same result as you see on the screen and to have a unified rule base, we will have to add the configuration and add the policies that I have. So to be able to do that, I made a document which has all these set commands to add the same configuration as I have. You will find the link in the description. Go to that link, get all these set commands, and then SSH to your firewall, go to configure mode, and copy paste all these set commands, and then do a commit. Then you should be ready to continue the session with me and have the same configuration so that you can get the same results. And whenever I get stuck, you will get the same result. Whenever it succeeds, you will get the same result, and so on. So please pause this video if you haven't done that already, and come back when you add the configuration. So, did you add the provided configuration? That's great. So let's continue. Last time we stopped at how we could show all the policies, and at the end I said something like, "Okay, you should be able to do that," and let's go. Um, so this is the script of last time. We used this API path to get all the policies, and let's just run the script again to get the result. And this was the result. Okay, so let us create a new script and save it as exercise 4. In this case, this is video 4. So we'll try to keep the files consistent with the videos. As this is the fourth video, we'll save it as exercise 4. You could name it whatever you want, but if you want to name it the same as I did, then we could just name it 4. So now we have a new script for this session. And first of all, whenever I run these scripts with the requests, because I'm doing the bypass right for the certificate, I still get this error, and I hate that because sometimes I don't know where to start copying because maybe I get this with it. So first of all, I want to disable that, and there is a way to do that. The It's very easy actually. What we do is just type URL lib3. So URL lib3 dot disable warnings, and that's it. Let's try to run and see if it works. So we will now exercise 4.py, and we have an error. So here you see it says name URL lib3 is not defined. Do you know what the reason could be? So we're calling something. Let's call this a function. Okay, we're calling this, but we don't have it. Again, we will have to import it. So import URL lib3. Okay, now it should work. And look at that. And instead of having this annoying error at the top, we just immediately get the result without, if you compare it with that before, you see, when I run it, I first get, this is an issue, insecure warning, and so on. Now I don't have it. And if you look at it, you already got an idea how we got this information about URL3. So you could open the link, read the documentation if you want, but you see that it does mention URL3 here, and it shows you a link to the documentation. So anyhow, we disabled these warnings. We have our policies, and let's continue with that. So again, let me copy this information and use the online JSON viewer. Let's go here. Let's just for consistency use the first link at the same site. Paste our JSON here, and as usual, we will go here. So we have rules, we have entry, and then we have a couple of rules. So most people would think, well, actually, that was very easy because we already know how to get information from these policies, and it's very simple. We have the path, rules, entry, and then we have numbers. So rules, result, then rules, and then entry. If we run that again, we have all of these entries, which is great. So how do I access this specific entry? So policy 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So most people would think like, okay, I have to print all policies. So I will just go and start one by one to add these policies, right? So let me try. So first I have one, and let's print policy 2 as well. Let's save it. And now let's run it. Oh, okay. So it seems it didn't work. So I don't know who did this way, but you would have faced this error. And this error, um, I knew it would happen, and I actually wanted you to experiment. But we will continue with that today, and we will know how to go over the policies. And you know, you might think, okay, this should work. Why is it not working? And we will come back to that. But first, to make it more easier, uh, let's just like before take this part that we will use because it's the same path for all the policies, right? So this is unified. This is common. So rules entry up to here, it's common. So we can make the dictionary up to here, and then we could access just the rules that we want. So let's call it policies, for example. And then we should be able to, sorry, we should be able to access it if this would work like this. But as we saw, it didn't work. And we got the below error. I think if you read the error, you will understand, at least have an idea of what the issue is. But let's continue and see why that is. So it says list indices must be integers or slices and not str, which is short for string. So it says list indices. Okay. So why is it saying list? I thought we had a dictionary. So because we did a parse from XML to dict, which is a dictionary. So I don't know why it's complaining about lists. So let us go over the variable types again, at least the ones that we learned up to today, just as a refresher at the same time also to be able to understand what's happening. So let's go over the variable types. First, we said a string. How do we make a string? Let's say my name, and the string is just double quotes. It can be single, but it's some text between quotes. So let's say Abdul. Okay, and then we had an integer, which is like a full number. Okay, it's shortened for integer, so let's call it salary, which is 1,000. Then we had dictionary, right, which we shortened with dict, and let's call this um, I don't know, something, policies. I have no idea. We already have policies. Uh, let's call it. Really have no idea. Um, Vegetable colors, veggies, whatever. So we make it by these brackets, and then we can just like here have two sides, the key and the value. Let's call orange. Orange will be orange, the color. So it's let's call it apple, and it will be green. And then we have a list. How do we make a list? Let's call these fruits. Fruit. And how do we make a list? Just the square brackets. And here we will have orange, comma, to add another one, and let's say bananas. Okay, so now we have a string, we have integer, we have a dictionary. As you can very clear the difference between a dictionary and a fruit. Of course, you have the key and value. So an apple is green, and of course with the dictionary we make a new dictionary with these square brackets. Then we have a list. We make a new list with these square brackets, right? And a list is a list, so each part of the list or each item in a list is separated with a comma. So now we have these four variables. But let's say I don't know this variable what it is. So for example, somewhere in some module or somewhere in some part of the script you defined it, but I don't know. Or let's say Python. How does Python know how to see the type? So there is something that we could use, and it's a type to get the type, and we can print it out. So let's say I want to know the type of this. Okay, so I will print out. I could just print name, right? So it will print the name. This is I print name, which is the string of Abder, which is correct. But now instead of just printing the name, I could add a function of type. And now let's see what will happen. Look at this. Now I know that instead of just typing printing out the value of this string variable name, I want to get the type to understand what the type is of this. So you can see now the class is what? str, which is string. That's great. Let me try it for the other things as well. So print type, and this one is called salary. String. That's not correct. I said this would be an integer. Can you spot where the issue is? So yes, if you want an integer, you don't put it between quotes, because if you add quotes, it means a string. So you could have a number as a string, but the moment that you want an integer, which is just a number, remove the quotes. Python will know that, okay, this is a number, which it will make as a string. So automatically it will detect it as a string. So now you see it's an int, which is an integer. Let's do the same for the rest. Like veggies. Sorry that I'm not original in the names of the lists and so on. I don't really prepare these things that much. So and I'm not really creative. So sorry about that. So now we have the type for everything. Look at this. This is perfect. So we had the string, which is correct. Integer, yes. Dictionary, yes. List, yes. So does it have to have a value? No, I could create an empty list. I could create a empty dictionary. So if I run this again, still the same. The moment that I put these square brackets, the moment that I put these square brackets, the moment that I put these quotes, Python will detect that or will assume that it is a list or a dictionary and so on. So now that we know how to get the type, and we said that we got the error originally that something related to list while we have a dictionary because we parsed it to dictionary, let's see if we can get the type for that as well. So let's take one step back up to rules, right? And let's print the type of this. Print type, and then we put policies. Let's run this. Okay, perfect. It's a dictionary as we expected because we parsed XML to dict. So let's take it a step further and add entry, which is, as you know, the next step here. So we have policies up to entry now, and let's print it again. Okay, now we understand why it's complaining about list, because entry actually is a part of a list. So I'm interested to print out the policies again to look if we can detect where things went wrong or where the change happened. So let's just print out policies again. Very important to understand type. I hope you understand now that you can get the types of variable based with by printing out the type of that variable. So we know that up to rules it's a dictionary, and then entries is a list. So we have to access a list different way, and this is what we will look at after a while. But so we have the policies up to entry. Let's print out the policies. Okay. You can see here, did you spot this? We have a lot of squarely brackets in the in the middle, which is indication of a dictionary, JSON. But it starts with a square bracket and ends with a square bracket. And what does that mean? What type is that? It's a list, yes. So if we remove entry again, just to go a level up, you will see that we start with square brackets for entry, which is still dictionary, and then the entry starts with a square brackets. So here the list starts, and then all policies in that is in a list. Actually, you could have seen it from the JSON parser. Look at this. This is what? Dictionary, right? Look at this dictionary. Look at this. Suddenly you have these square brackets, which is an indication of a list. So how do we access a list? So a list, instead of let's add entry again. So a list is accessed not by the name like this, but with the number. For example, I want to have the first policy. Also very important when you are looking at it from a programming perspective, we start with 0. So a list starts with 0. And this is also what you have seen here. It didn't start with 1. So the first item in a list is not 1, it's 0. So this is very important. That's why also you will understand a little bit the programming or the scripting memes and humor about people saying 0 for 1 and 1 for 0 and so on. So we start with 0. So with this, I should be able to access the first policy. Let's run it and see if it works. That's perfect. So we have one single rule, rule 01. This is what I wanted. And before, when we did this, because we thought that we will access it like a dictionary with the value of 0, what did we get? We get the error that says that it is list must be integers or slices, not string. Because here, again, The type is what? With the quotes, it's a string. We just want an integer, which is just a number. So you might think, okay, now I have the answer to the last question. How do we print out all the policies, right? So very simple. And one, and two, three. How many policies do I have? I have 7 policies. So you should have at least 7 policies, because if you had added the configuration, you should have all of these policies that we will be working with. If you didn't add the configuration, please pause the video, go back to the link in the description to add these policies with the set commands that are provided in the link. Anyhow, to go back, so I could print all of these policies one by one. I will, for now, do 3. I hope you spotted the error, because I said 3, the first 3, but it's not the first 3, it's the first 4. Even though I'm ending with 3, again, it's very important. The first entry of an array or a list or whatever is 0, not 1. 0 to access the first item in a list. So we have the policies here. We printed them out. Name, rule 13, rule 02, and so on. So I don't want to do that. So I don't want to add multiple times the same print statement. First of all, you don't know how many times I have to add the print statement. Today I have 7 policies. Tomorrow someone adds 10 policies. My script is not working anymore because I can't print all of them. So I have to go to my firewall and tell everybody, please don't make any changes, and then come back and then update my script with a different. It's stupid, right? So it doesn't make any sense. This is one, and the second thing is just there's a principle in programming called dry. So it means do not repeat yourself. Don't repeat yourself, which is short, dry. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to repeat ourselves multiple times. So there must be a solution, right? So a solution is to loop over the policies. And if you have ever heard about programming or scripting or whatever, you will hear people talk about looping, loop, and so on. So how do we create a loop? So first of all, let's just talk about the principles of a loop. So let's say we do it all in our daily life. We loop over things. Let's say, for example, I have a grocery list, a shopping list. So what steps should I go through to be able to buy these things? For example, I go to the first item in my list, okay, and for example, it says apples, and I add it to my cart. Then I go to the second item in my list. It says bananas. I add bananas to my cart. Third item, fourth item, until I finish all the items in my list, right? So the same is for a loop. And the loop that we will go over today is the for loop. And it's the same principle. So in a for loop, you go over each item of a list or a dictionary or a row of a CSV file in the future when we start working with CSV files. So you just loop over, let's say, lines or items, and then we do something with it. And so to make a loop, it has a specific syntax, but it's extremely easy. You will be shocked about how easy it is. But first, to be able to test it, let's make a grocery list to understand the concept. You can leave everything as is up to the policies and so on. We'll get back to that. But for now, let's just create a new list. You should be able to create a new list. I should be able to wait for you to create a new list. I'm waiting for you to create a new list. Put whatever items in the grocery list that you want: bananas, apples, chicken, meat, whatever. I hope you finished your list. So, very simple. This is how we make a list. And even Visual Code knows about it and finishes my second or my closing square brackets. And because these are strings, I will put my bananas, and it's a list. So each item is separate with a comma. So I have, let's say, apples, and let's add a chicken. So this is my list. How do I loop over this list? So um, we said we will start with a for loop. So it's very simple, for, and then next thing is also very simple, item in groceries, which is the name of the list. Groceries. And let's say print item. Okay. Look at that. So it's extremely easy. It's just for, and then whatever value I could. It shouldn't be item. I could do x, and then of course I have to change x here because I'm printing this value out. Same. I could call it grocery. Then again, I have to, because I'm printing this value out, I'm referencing a variable here which doesn't exist. It says x is not defined. So you see all, even the squarely brackets. So of course, if this is seen as a variable. So it is a variable made out of what? Out of this list. So each item for whatever is in this list, because in groceries, which is my list. So if I call it x now, for x in groceries, it means that for each item, this is x in the first, this is x in the second time, this is x in the third time, until it finishes in what? In groceries, which is my list. So it will open groceries and then say for each x, for each item, for each grocery, for each whatever, you can name it whatever. But if you want to print it out, for example, or use it in the for loop, you will of course have to use the same as what you put here. Okay, for each item in this list, for each x in groceries, for each item in groceries, print out item. So it will go over the list, which is groceries, and for each item, it will store this value in item. So item in the first run, it will be bananas. The second, apples. The third, chicken. If I add something else, let's say meatballs. Again, I'm very creative. Run it again. Meatballs. So it will know, it knows that this is the list. This list has 4 items, and it will, let's say, make the variable item in the first run. It will make it bananas. In the second run, it will make it apples. In the third run, it will make it chicken. In the fourth run, it will make it meatballs, and so on and so on. So I'm sure you're shocked on. I'm sure you're shocked to see how easy a for loop is. How easy it is to loop over things, and we can make it more descriptive. For example, I want to print out added this item to the cart. How would I do that? So I want to say that in the first one, it says, okay, added bananas to the cart, added apples to the cart, added chicken to the cart, added meatballs to the cart, because this is the action that I will do uh, with my grocery list. You should know this. This is not complicated, so we can do it in multiple ways, but the way that we thought was f string. So we do f, then we said we will say add, and then item, because it's a variable, we have to do it between these squirrely brackets, add item to the cart. The rest is also just text. So now it should give me the instructions what to do. Add bananas to the cart, add apples to the cart, add chicken to the cart, add meatballs to the cart, and so on. So now that we know how to loop over a list, and as you know, remember that entry was a list. This is why we couldn't directly access it. So we could remove this, go back to our original policies. After this example, I'm actually kind of hungry. but let's continue our session and then we can go eat. So, how do we create a for loop? So, for, and then whatever. Let's call it x. For x in, what are we going to loop over? So, what is the thing that we will loop over? What is the thing that we want to get each part or item out of? If you said policies, this is correct. Policies, which is also a dictionary. Don't forget this column. Don't forget this column. This here, very, very important. This also brings us to a very important point. When I do enter, do you see what happened here? It didn't start here. It started here. Why? It's 4 spaces or a tab that it adds automatically. Why did Visual Code add it? Because in Python, when you write code and you have to nest it, right? It is based on indentation. So you have to make it in the let's say, for example, for loop. I cannot put the for loop and sort. If I do, let me print out x like we did before, right? You see already it's red. It's complaining. Okay. So if I run this now, this is an important, very, very important error. And this is why also I recommend, especially in the beginning, to use an IDE. Don't use text editor like a notepad or whatever to start with. Use an IDE because the IDE will give you this will automatically indent your code, and it will show you an error if it's not, and so on. It will help you in that a lot. So this error is extremely important. Indentation error, expected an indented block. Why? Because I'm looping over something and I want it to have in it loop. So the print, I want to have it in my loop. So this, if I run this now, perfect. Just because of this indentation. Python, if you're going to have like, let's say, nested things, like in this case, we're looping over policies, okay? And we want to print it out. So we take this, let's say, value. We want this to happen under the for loop, and it has to be nested underneath it. So this is extremely important. If you see error that is related to indentation like this, please double check that it is correctly indented and that you have the correct amount of space in the script. So we just did something great. We just printed all the policies, regardless if it is 7 policies or 8. I could add 100 policies now. It doesn't matter, because in the end, what it will do is it will, just like with a grocery list when we added meatballs, it will just go over the list until it reaches the last item. In our case, it will go over the list until it reaches the last policy. So X, you will see it a lot in scripts, but especially in the beginning, and to make it readable for other people, let's call it policy, because it's in the end we're printing out a policy, not X. What's X? So this doesn't matter really. It's whatever you want it to do. You put your name if you want it, but then here print your name as well. It doesn't matter. The most important thing is that you understand that this is like a placeholder for, same example with the bananas and apples, for the items. But if you call it policy, of course, in your script, and you want to do something with it in that for loop, of course, you have to use the same name. You can't say here X and then use policy here. Of course, it's like a variable which is not defined. You don't have something called policy. You never define something that's policy. And even if I would say define a variable with policy, let's call it test. Okay. First of all, what do you think will happen? What would be the result? So I loop over this list, okay, for X in policy, which means I'm looping over it. That doesn't change. But then I'm printing policy. What will happen? Think about it. I'm just printing test. Simple. because I'm looping over items. We have 7 policies: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Do we have 7 or 8? Let me check. Yeah, we have no up to 7, which was again with the 0. It says 8. So we had 8 policies. So what I did is I printed out uh, 8 times test. Why? Because I went over the policies, which I have 8. So for the first policy, which in the list is 0, for the first policy, I print policy, which is this variable. It's fixed. And the second time, I went over the second time, which and for me is the second policy. What do I do after I enter or access the second policy? I print policy, which is this. So it makes complete sense. So if I put a policy here again, first of all, I have to remove this one, else we have a big issue. So if I print it out, we again get all the policies because I accessed the items with policy and I printed out these items with policy. So now again, very nice, all good. We get these policies, but how do I exit or get specific information? Because to be honest, the customer is still working on his audit and the auditor asked for some other information. So let's go over the following scenario. Let's put it here on the top. So the customer wants you to provide him with a CSV list of the firewall, CSV list that has all policy names, source information, and the destination information. Okay, so I need to have that for all policies. So it should be very straightforward, right? How do I access this information now? So we see that in a policy, name is name. So how do I access it? Let me try something. How do we know what this policy is? Is it a string? How can we know that? If you don't know the answer, I will get very, very mad. We just spent like 10 minutes on type. So we use type exactly. So then I know how to access it. Okay, so it's a dictionary. So we know how to access a dictionary, right? How do we access a dictionary? Just the same way we do it with every dictionary. So my dictionary is now called policy, which changes each iteration. So every time it goes over policies, the first policy, this will be my first policy. And second policy, it will be my second policy, and so on and so on. So what do I want to access from this dictionary, right? We want the name. Will this work? Will this work? No, it will not work. Why? Because the exact string, as you can see, or let's call it the key, is at name, not just name. So we need at in front of it. So, and then we could access other things, right? So we should be able to access policy again. And then what do we need? We need the source. Where is the source? Source, and then you have destination. So just for your understanding, to and from, these are the zones. So we need source and destination. So it's very straightforward. We don't even have to go back to the JSON viewer. After a while, you'll be able to read it. You will understand both how to read JSON very easily, but at the same time also how to read the Palo Alto configuration easily. So this should work, right? CSV file with a comma. Let's run it. Look at that. We just extracted all information for all policies. We have the name, we have the source, we have the destination. But what is wrong with this? I don't like this. To be honest, the customer will send it to the audit team. They don't know what does member mean. For example, here you have member, and then you have 2 entries. It's complicated. So it looks good, but I don't like the output. I want it to be really like a CSV. So I want something. If I would take this as an example, instead of this, I want it to be, let's say, like this, the policy name. We can leave this like that. Here also I want something like that. So it's very clear that this is the policy name, these are the sources, and this is the destination. So this is your exercise for next lesson. I want it to be like this, and then of course we have to write it into a CSV file. Normally, you should know how to do that from the Linux terminal, or from the terminal, not from within Python. We didn't do that yet, but if you remember correctly, we did before. We just piped it to a file. So in this case, it's called policies. Let's say dot CSV. So if I do ls policies.csv or a nano or whatever, you see that we have a file with all these policies. So, but again, I want it to be more like a CSV file like this. And for the ones that are really, really up for a challenge, it's not really a challenge if you know where to start. But now, if we open this file, and we would open it in Excel, for example, we don't have headers. So again, we send it to audit team. They don't want to analyze and ask you what is the first column, what is the second column, what is the third column. No, they just want to open the Excel sheet, and it should have the column headers on top. So this one, we didn't see it yet. We didn't go over it yet, but it should be very straightforward if you just use a little bit of logic. So just remember that we need only one header, okay, for the whole file. We don't need a header for each entry of the policies. So we only need the header on the top as the first, let's say, row. Maybe we can call it print statement. Go with that logic, and you should be able to provide this. You could share your result with me in the comments, or in a private message on Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube comments, whatever, so I can review it with you and see if it's okay. It could be that we will try next week to go over it together if I don't forget. But for now, this should be okay for today. So let's recap what we learned up to now. So in the past sessions, we only had like 3 real sessions. We did learn a lot from a Python and PANOS API perspective, in my opinion. So you guys did great. So let's recap what happened. So for the Python part, what did we learn? To start with, we learned how to import things. If you really started with zero knowledge of Python, you didn't know how to import things. That's a very important part. And to import things, a lot of time for modules or libraries that are not standard, we have to install it with pip. Then we went over the request module. How can we do an API request with the requests module? Um, then we have the XML to dict. So to be able to work easily with dictionaries with JSON format. Uh, when we get XML back, we can use this module, and it's great. So we also went over XML versus JSON, which is 2 different types. So in the beginning, we got XML back, and then we converted to JSON that we find easier to access. We went over variables. We actually refreshed it today, and we showed you how to get the type. So with the type function. So what did we see as from variables? We saw strings, integers, dictionaries, lists. So these things you'll be able to recognize them and to be able to create them from scratch, which is very easy and very straightforward. We used a couple of times the f string, which is very easy to print out things, and to use, not only to print out things, but to use a combination of strings and variables together. We also learned how to access data in both dictionaries and today in lists. So we know how to access data in a dictionary and in a list, and you saw that it's different. You can't do it the same way. And today, a very important thing is we use the for loop. to loop over things. So as you can see, you already are stacking up your Python knowledge. And this is very nice to see that within a couple of sessions we did go over a lot of things. And again, we are working with PANOS API, but the knowledge you learn for the Python part, you will use it everywhere. So we are learning you how to use the API. Of course, we need to start somewhere, which is the Palo Alto Networks firewall. But this same knowledge, you can use it anywhere. And later we will try to get um, add examples on how to call APIs of totally different vendors or online services. Um, so it's already a lot. And now to see over what we did with the Palo Alto Networks API. Um, well, we did the online documentation. We went to the online documentation, getting started, and so on, and how to generate an API key. We used the find command to find commands that we didn't know or that we don't remember that well. We also used CLI debug on to look at what API calls we can do through when we do a CLI command, what API call it generates. We did the same for the GUI debug by going to slash debug, if you remember. Um, we have the API browser by going to slash API. And then we also went on how to find the XPath in a file. So within 3 sessions, we did a lot, and we will build on that in the next sessions. So that's it for now. Again, after each session, don't just stop. Try to do things. After the last session on how to print out security policies and so on, and how to use the debug CLI, I had multiple people sending me screenshots of things that they did, different CLI commands that they created an API for, and then printed it out to the screen. People accessing their net policies instead of their security policies, and that's great to see because that's the only the only way to really learn. And that's it for this session, and see you next session.